Why would a former Satanist become a Christian? What was her journey into and out of Satanism? Well, you're about to find out, because our guest today, Tepe, was a Satanist who has recently become a follower of Jesus, and let me tell you, she has a story to tell. Now, before we jump in, tell me about your name, Tepe. Where did it come from? What does it mean? It's a single name.
Yeah, I don't have like I'm just like Madonna or Cher. It's just Tepe.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. That's my last name. I've gone by that since I was like a kid almost, so it just kind of stuck.
I love it. That's awesome. No, that makes sense. Totally fair. So let's go back to your childhood. I first heard about you because you shared coming to faith, and you referenced the book Evidence That Demands a Verdict. My father wrote, recently helped him update that. We will get to that. But just tell me about your family growing up, where you grew up, what that was like.
Yeah, so I grew up in kind of a mid to rural, not really, like I went to high school surrounded by corn, if that gives you an idea. But we were very, like my mom was a believer, like huge believer, right? And we were very avid Christians growing up. We actually were raised Catholic. And my mom was very like, these kids are gonna be saved. You know what I mean? Like she was adamant on getting us to have a relationship with Jesus. And so we, would go to church, a lot. And we were in Sunday school, like every week we would do Sunday school. And I remember being like the kind, not like the outcast really, but like I wasn't very social in school, and I was kind of quiet and weird. I'm still weird, but that's a whole other thing. But I would ask like weird questions, like what would at the time like those kids like would consider weird. Like, did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? Because they weren't like born necessarily.
Yeah.
So like, what did they look like? And I kind of got laughed at for that. So that was like kind of the first time that I felt kind of like ostracized by the church. And and when I say church, not like the religion, but like the people that are part of it, right? And then kind of continuing to grow up in that, and was such a believer, and was like, would pray over a piece of candy when I was a kid. It was like, it was to like that level. And then I kind of, you get into high school, and there's a bunch of different, like, not pressure, but you get a lot of outside influence. And there was a point where I will say, like, there are times as a Christian and as a believer where you're going to be like in the valley, as like we like to say, where you're not on fire, right? And it feels kind of cold, and you're like, are you there? Like you know that he is, but like sometimes you can't feel it. And so I definitely went through one of those periods, like in high school, in college. And instead of like understanding what was happening, I just fell off, because I was like, well, clearly, he's not there. So that's kind of what happened. I got into a lot of like occult in college. I had like, we called ourselves a coven. There was like 4 of us, and did a lot of like ritual and spell work, tarot cards and all that kind of like oracles and stuff. And from there, just weirdly enough, kept like getting called back, would like every now and then, like when I would get really deep into like the occult, would have just like the sudden urge to pick up a Bible. And I was like, this is weird. I shouldn't be feeling like this, but there's always been something about me like gravitating towards scripture, even when I was like, a self-proclaimed witch. Right. And so after, all of that kind of happened, just kind of like a whole bunch of stuff, like in my life had gone down, like with, family members. Like my aunt was diagnosed with CJD back in like 2012. And I was like, well, if you're there, like kind of did the atheist thing of like, your God's not there. And if he is, then like, why would you want to worship someone who like lets this happen and like all that stuff? So I basically went even further down the occult rabbit hole and was like, I don't feel anything anymore, so let me just look for any religion that I can. So like I have like the Book of Mormon and like a Taoism book, and like I even found something from like Dianetics, and like I just started reading a whole bunch of weird stuff, and found a Satanic Bible and read through that thing in like a day. And I was like, man, I really agree with all this. And like the headspace that I was in at the time, you know, and just kind of became a full-fledged atheistic Satanist at that point.
Okay, now for a lot of people, when you say atheistic Satanist, some people are going to be like, what on earth does that mean? Yeah. Now, you make a distinction in one of your short videos on Instagram between kind of like a supernatural Satanism, which you are not a part of, and atheistic Satanism. Clarify for us.
Yeah, so there are, at least to my knowledge, right, in 2024, there are two main sects, if you will, of like Satanism. There is an atheistic sect, which is like the Satanic Temple or TST, which basically, to speak on TST, because I was a member of TST for a while in my like local chapter, to speak on that, because I am familiar with that portion, it is greatly like a political movement in opposition to like a religion, right? So a lot of the stuff that TST like preaches is like religious equality and, you know, equality for everybody. And they're very big on like, they're kind of like, I won't say that they're like social justice warriors, but they're on the cusp of that, you know? And a lot of the stuff that they do is actually like still like as like a born again Christian, I'm like, that's still really cool that they do like donation drives and all this, you know what I mean? Like they're very like a humanistic kind of a thing. They're just doing it for like a totally wrong reason. So, but that's the atheistic Satanism is, so they don't actually believe in God or Satan. They actually use Satan as like, I don't want to say a mascot because that makes it sound weird, but they see him as like a symbol of like, because in their eyes, there's actually a book that a lot of them will like have you read, and I can divulge that later. But it's basically like their idea is that, well, in the mythos, right, that is Christianity, that, you know, God, you know, was all powerful and didn't give the proper authority or didn't give the proper attention to, or whatever reason, right, that they had, that actually like Lucifer, who started out as Lucifer, then became Satan, right, was the knowledge bringer. And because he felt oppressed by God, this is their narrative, he felt oppressed by God, and he felt like, you know, he didn't want to be a slave anymore, so he revolted and took a lot of the angels with him. So that is like the mythos storyline that like TST and a lot of atheistic Satanism would have you like kind of go with. But they don't actually believe in the existence of like Satan or God or angels or anything like, you know, supernatural, as, you know, we would say. On the other hand, you do have theistic Satanism, which they do believe in all of that, and they do believe in God most of the time, and they do believe in Satan, but they just choose to worship Satan instead of God.
That makes sense. I actually was on the website of the Satanic Temple not long ago, because even though it's rooted in Salem, Massachusetts, of course, they were starting some clubs at a school across town, maybe 10 minutes from where I live. And we have some friends and family members and church members who go there. And it was a huge controversy in Southern Orange County for a while. So I was on their site, and they were describing themselves as, I think they described as humanist, and Satan is just kind of a literary figure that they look to in fiction as a model of who is a free thinker. He rejected authority, like certain characteristics in him, obviously a different spin than Christians would put on it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of their mascot, minus the supernatural stuff. So if you're raised as a Christian, you believed in supernatural things, like minimally angels and demons and the soul. So why do you think you gravitated towards a naturalistic, atheistic version of Satanism as opposed to something else?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. So I think that a lot of it would, I haven't had this conversation yet, so this is weird actually like admitting. So I went to school, I actually went to college for psychology. And when you do that, you tend to like unpack a lot of yourself. And I kind of had this like mental, it wasn't like a break really, but it was like, I don't believe in Santa anymore, so why do I believe in it, kind of a thing,
Okay.
where it was really that stark, you know what I mean? It was really like, I don't feel God, I can't see God, I can't hear God, so like what says that God exists, kind of you know what I mean? So I think that that's really kind of where that kind of break started, was me exploring, like, I was, and I still am, which a lot of people are like, that's weird of you that you're a Christian now because I know who you are, and I'm like, yeah, but like, but listen to this, right? There was no, you know, in my head there was like no evidence for it, and I'm still like a very scientifically based person, I'm still very logical about stuff. And at that point in my life I was like, I can't justify this, you know? So I think that's
Mm.
really what happened.
Okay.
And in the occult and stuff. So when I started getting into the occult and all that, it kind of was like still in my head a very science-based thing, because I was like, oh, the vibrations of this stone are, you know, it was like a very metaphysical thing, but in my head it was still like, it's justifiable because it's science, you know? Is that's, I know that's weird, but that's kind of my mental state, like where it was.
What are some of the things you think the church, at least in your experience, failed to do that just pushed you away from Christianity at that point?
So the immediate two things that come to mind are like acceptance of, not not complete acceptance, because we're not about that, right? But acceptance of just like who a person is, like their personality. You know, it's like I've always been that person that's like really into like kind of dark and macabre and like, you know what I mean? I am not, I don't glorify death, but I'm fascinated with it, you know, because I've
Mm.
never, that's like one thing I've never done is died, you know.
Fair
So I'm
enough.
just like, so I'm intrigued by it, you know. And I've always, I've worn a lot of like, I wear dark clothing and like I look a lot
Okay.
gothic a lot. And a lot of Christians kind of look at the outer of a person and go,
Mm.
well, you're probably not who we want here, right? Like, you're scary, you make
Wow.
us uncomfortable, like we're kind of, and I am going to say some probably controversial stuff right now, but
Do it.
a lot of what I grew up with was a lot of just unnecessary judgment
Mm.
from people. And I still find that, like, if you go on my Instagram, like, you're gonna still see, like, I get judged a lot by people, right?
Mm.
And most of the comments and stuff that I do get on my videos are people like, thank you for bringing this up, like, we need to talk about this as the body, like, we need to talk about this because you're pushing people away. So that's like the first thing would be
Okay.
just, you know, judgment, right? And the second thing was I wasn't really like allowed to ask questions. So it was more of a, hey, why do we believe this? Or if God can do this, why does this happen? Or, you know, just like kind of just questions that like anybody would ask. And like the difficult questions, right? So like, why are there so many starving children in the world if God is like a benevolent God? That's a great
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
But, you know, and instead of being like, well, you know, here's the actual reason for that, you know, we have free will, and like, you also are called to help these people, and if you're not called, if you're not helping, then you're part of the problem. But it's, I was just kind of told to just like, for a lack of a better term, like sit down and shut up, kind of a thing,
Wow.
because we don't want you to ask those questions, because we don't really know either we don't know the answer, we don't like the answer, um, or you just, it's not your place to ask,
Mm.
because, you know, we walk by faith. You don't have to have the answer, but the answer is comforting for a lot of people, and the
Mm.
answer, you know, the answer is what solidifies people in that faith. So
Those are two great answers, and I hear that a lot from people who go through periods of doubt and leave the faith. Some come back and some don't. Now, you mentioned your mom. Do you have siblings? Was your father in the picture? What was your family like as you were growing up?
yeah, so as I do have a younger brother. He's like 2-ish years younger than me. And I have a dad. He is my father, but he's also my dad. he has been with us like the whole time. We have a very close-knit family structure, which I'm very blessed to have. Growing up, the three of us, so like my mom and my brother and I would always go to church, and my dad had and still does, because he's nuts, he'll never stop. But he has a job that's kind of like high demand, very demanding of him. So he never went to church really with us as kids. He went on like Easter and Christmas, and like he was there for like, my christening when I was a baby, with the Catholic faith. And he was there for like my first communion and like the big important stuff. He was there. And I'm pretty sure, because we've had conversations, I'm pretty sure that he's agnostic. I'm praying for him. We're working on him.
Okay.
So
okay.
We're slowly but surely we're working on him. But yeah. And then I do have, my mom's sister. One of her sisters passed away in 2012, but her other sister, is my aunt is just, she's not my aunt. Like we're closer than that. I don't know. She's an amazing person, and she is a big believer as well. And she would even like go to church with us sometimes. So.
Gotcha. So your mom, you described her as a very just avid, committed Christian that rubbed off on you. How did she respond, and how did you tell her when you started questioning Christianity, started leaving it, exploring some of these other faiths?
Yeah, that's weird to go back and remember. And I might start crying right now, and I'm so sorry. But it was really hard on her, right? Because she knew, like, if I would have stayed down that path, like she knew what the outcome was. And like, I didn't, because I didn't believe it, like I was like, I'm not going to the hell that, you claim to. And even I think hell is like a different thing. It's not like fire and brimstone in my head. It's like a different thing. But, she was more, I love my mother. I love my mother dearly. I really do. This is just me being honest right now. She was very much like, instead of being like kind of understanding and curious and let's have a conversation, she just kind of like put the fear of God in you instead.
Okay.
So yeah, it was kind of one of those. And so when I came out as like a witch to her, she was like, I want you out of the house. Like, I don't want anything witchcrafty. You take your cards, you take your crystals, you take everything. I don't want anything in my house. And I remember like a conversation, not really a conversation, it was like a big argument where we were like yelling at each other. And this is like back when I was like in college, like just fresh out of college. And I remember, me being like, well, if you want everything Wiccan or pagan out of your house, then that means me too. And it was just like a big thing. And at that point, I didn't care, because I was like a very young adult and just didn't care about anything, as, a lot of young adults do. And then they realize later that it's a little too late and the damage is done. But that's kind of what happened. And then I was like, hey, I need to talk to you. Like, I'm a Satanist. And that went over even better, if you can. It was she was devastated, actually. And that's one of the things. Like, someone asked me on Instagram, like, what's one of like the worst things about that you remember about like being a Satanist? And I was like, disappointing my mom. Like, that was, because yeah, she was like devastated to find out that I had like completely taken like a 180 away from Christ. And like, I basically, like, in her eyes, and it's true, right? Like, I had damned myself is basically like her whole vision of it. Yeah, she didn't take it very well.
Well, as a parent, I can understand how devastating that would be, to have your child, say something like that. So I get it. When you say it seems like at first you were describing yourself as kind of Wiccan and a witch. I've interviewed an ex-psychic and 2 ex-witches. One was an ex-teen witch. One was a 5th generation witch from down in South America. All 3 of them believers, just intriguing stories. But they made a distinction between kind of like white magic, black magic, white witch, black witch. How did you, what does it mean when you say you're a witch? What did you do? How did you practice that? And why did you identify that way?
So it took a lot of forms, right? Like the first thing was like very nature based. So I would have considered myself like a green witch. And that's like one of the first conversations that I had with my mom was like, here's what this means to me. Like, here's what, I'm actually doing. And a lot of it was sitting in the woods and like meditating and like talking to mushrooms and like just like weird stuff, right? And so that was basically it. I didn't do like a whole lot of like spell work at that time, because I didn't feel it necessary, right? And so after the green magic kind of phase, after the green magic kind of phase, I think there was a period of time where I was like, why do I want to touch a Bible? So I kind of went back again, and then never like found a church, didn't really fit in with a lot of, Christian thinkers in my area. So I just kept like kind of going back and forth, right? And at some point I became what I had considered a gray witch, which was like, you have like the distinction between like white and black magic, right? Where like, white witches think like Glinda from like the Wizard of Oz, where they do magic but it's like all for good, and that's like the intent, and you're like, it's love and light, and like, you know what I mean? And then you have like the black magic, which is like, I don't know, like probably something from the Blair Witch Project. I don't know, I never practiced any black magic.
Okay.
I've always been a very like kind-hearted person who doesn't believe that anybody should suffer regardless of whether or not you made someone else suffer. Like I've always been just like a very like, I've never been like a malicious person, or that like one time on the school bus I squished a fly against the window and then cried about it for the rest of the day. Like I'm not even joking, like that's the kind of person.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I've but there was a point where I was a practicing witch and a Satanist at the same time, right?
Okay.
So it was like, so I considered myself a satanic witch, and this was like back in like 2020, right? Because we didn't have enough going on, I had to like do all this other crazy stuff in my life too. So at that point I was like a Satanist and working at a metaphysical shop and a practicing witch, that I considered myself a satanic witch. And I will say, what is this? I hate this thing.
I have no idea.
It's like, it's on Apple. It's like, I just need to not talk with my hands because it does weird stuff. But it was to the point where I was dangerously close to theistic Satanism. Like dangerously close to where like I knew the names of demons and I would like call upon the names of demons. You know what I mean? It was very like, looking back on it now, it is super uncomfortable to like think about. And I'm amazed that I am where I am right now. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Now, you just made a distinction I want to probe into a little bit more if you're comfortable, as I never really thought about which one would be more dangerous, atheistic Satanism or theistic Satanism.
Ooh.
Sounds like you're implying that theistic Satanism, because of the demonic forces, you said you were dangerously close to that concerned you a lot more.
Yeah, and the reason for that, right, is because so when you're atheistic, there's an easier way for you to be like, okay, well, this thing happened, or I have this feeling, or something happened in my life. Was that God, right? And it kind of, you're kind of a clean slate at that point, right? If you're atheistic, you're kind of a clean slate, and you're like, it's science, baby. Like that's all there is to it. When you are theistic and you're a theistic Satanist, you already normally, like most theistic Satanists, already believe in God, but they don't side with him, right? So instead of being like that clean slate, you have a bunch of like just like gunk all over that canvas, and it's very difficult to wipe off. Um and I'll say that my life as a Satanist, like, was pretty easy. My life as a Satanist was pretty easy. And I will also say that, like, not the moment, but like very, for this conversation, like the moment that I became baptized, like, you start getting like spiritually attacked all the time. Like all
Interesting.
the time.
Interesting. Okay, we'll unpack that a little bit. You talked about what the church, in your experience, maybe failed to do, allowing you to ask questions, but also didn't feel like you belonged because you were different. What was the draw of entering into witchcraft and then entering into Satanism? Like, why did you go that route?
In witchcraft, right, it really depends on your location and like where you are as to whether or not there is like a coven in your area, right? So like I'm from Indiana, and I, at the time, I still live in Indiana, but at the time was living here too, and didn't find like a coven or anything, that I could be part of. So it became a very individual type of thing where it really didn't matter what I was wearing, or the things that I thought, or like my personality or anything. It really just all boiled down to like, what did I want to do at that time? And it was just all on me. And then things kind of spiraled, right? And then when I found TST, I was like looking at like, all these like pictures of people and like reading all this stuff from them, and like watched, like they have a documentary out, and was, watched all this. And I was like, these people look like me, right? Like these are the people that also like the macabre, and they also wear black, and like I feel like I can be myself around these guys and not get like, judged for it. And that's kind of exactly what happened, is when I found TST and became a member and stuff, and like we all became like kind of a close-knit group of people. They were incredibly welcoming and incredibly kind, and like, and I'll even say, like, as a Christian, like some of these people are some of the kindest. I'm not saying they're nice. There's a difference between nice and kind, right? So they are kind people. They just, they're just in it for the wrong reason. You know what I mean? So that's, I think, to answer your question, that's kind of why.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Belonging, and you identify with people and you feel at home and they have a cause. So when you decided to not stay and become a Christian, did that kindness remain? Were they happy that you found your path, or had you betrayed the cause and now we're an outsider and we're no longer welcome?
That people are often shocked by the answer to that, and they are very like, hey man, you do you, kind of a thing, right? They were very like understanding about it, because there was a point, right, where like, and I even used to be like we had like a small team of people that would like actually put together rituals for our chapter, and I was a part of that team that even was like working on the rituals and stuff. And I just kind of just ghosted them for a little bit as I was trying to like work on stuff, because at this time, like during this time of my time in TST, my mom had started to have symptoms and stuff.
Okay.
So that kind of was a catalyst in really getting me out. And once I was out, and once I still have people on Facebook that are like, we're like friends on Facebook, that we don't really interact a whole lot, but I had, someone, I had posted my testimony on Facebook, and one of the people that I knew from TST had commented and was just like, hey girl, I'm glad that you found your place and I wish you all the best, kind of. It was really cool, because I definitely wasn't expecting that. But then again, knowing the people that they are, like, it makes total sense. So,
it's interesting that the Christians did not respond well when you were in the fold, obviously, and then many of the Satanists treated you well even when you left. You know, that's something we obviously need to do a lot better at.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Now, help me understand one thing I'm just not sure that I understand. You're talking about being in an atheistic version of Satanism and yet doing rituals. I mean, are they basically a science experiment? Are they just, what do they do? Help somebody from the outside understand.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in TST, the rituals that they do, right? I'm not talking about black masses right now. The rituals that they do are very like, as far as I know, things could have changed because I haven't been
Sure.
there since like 2021, like early 2021. But at the time, I know all of our rituals that we did were basically like there weren't any that were solidified throughout the whole. I'm not going to say religion. I'm going to say organization, right? So everything was kind of very local and kind of on an individual basis. I just remembered they actually do have one, as far as I know, as far as I remember, one ritual that is like organization wide, and it is an abortion ritual. So
oh my goodness.
There's that. I just remembered that.
Holy cow.
Yeah, that's but like the stuff that we used to do was a lot of like mind theater, right? To where like we, not to divulge too much about that, right? Because, you know, for whatever purpose, but one of the rituals that we had actually like written was basically the skinny of it was like taking something, you know, that you wanted to like remove out of your life, be it like a feeling or a illness or just a thought that you keep having, or like something that you want to remove and just lift a burden off, and you write it on a piece of paper and you burn it, kind of, you know, very symbolic.
Okay.
Like I said, just kind of mind theater as kind of like a psychological way to visually and physically remove stuff from your life, right? We
Okay.
never did. I can say I never did with anybody else. So it wasn't like a structured thing. We never did any like blood ritual sacrifice stuff, right? But there was a time where I had individually started doing like rituals with blood as a way to like remove things from, you know, like we're all human and we go through a lot of stuff, and some people
Sure.
have very difficult ways of processing, right? And so that was one of my ways of processing, but it was never like an ode to, you know, the devil, or it was never like, here, this is for you kind of a thing. It was like, this is me removing this from myself. So
that makes sense. Now, I do remember this ritual now looking on the website, and I don't have it in front of me, but I remember there was just so much talk about my body and my choice.
Everything is the individual.
Everything is the individual. So even a ritual like, you know, an abortion ritual, I would argue is satanic on one level, but you're not calling up Satans and demons and doing a seance. So that issue is so dividing in our culture in the sense of like autonomy and individualism. Why would it be an abortion ritual? Like, why that one that they would push so hard? Is it because those on the other side are saying, no, there's restrictions on what you can do with your body, and the unborn is life, and this is a way of just sticking it to them, saying, nope, not only do we believe this, we're going to practice it together as a ritual. Like, am I misrepresented, or do you think that's fair?
So it's to my knowledge, right? It wasn't something, or I guess it isn't something where the actual act takes place like in a ritual setting. It's more like, as far as I understand, it's a way for the woman to process what's actually happening by justifying it saying, this is my body, this is my choice, this is my life. Like everything is me in Satanism. Like that's the one thing that Satanism is like, I reject all forms of authority. Like if I want to do this, like I don't care. And like how you know, Jesus says, well, if they strike one cheek, then turn the other, right? Like just
got it.
What, you know, it is Satanism means to pervert everything that Christ stood for and to pervert everything that Christianity is. So they instead of saying, well, if someone yells at you, bless them, right? Like pray for your enemies, right? They would say, well, I think if I remember right, it's actually like in the Levian, the Satanic Bible, but it says like, if a man wrongs you, destroy him.
Wow.
So, and like the word, I'm pretty sure it's like the word destroy. So it's very much like you do your thing and it doesn't matter what other people say. And it doesn't matter, you know, if you're hurting really anybody else, and it doesn't like nothing matters except for you and your experience.
So you seem to describe that you felt yourself connecting with these people and you belonged. What are some of the stories of the other people that you met? Are these a lot of people coming out of religion as well? Like, what are some of the other stories you recall of people that went to the Satanic Temple?
Mm-hmm. A lot of them actually came from like Western religion, right? So a lot of them came from Christianity or like Judaism or but we did have others that were just like their whole family was atheistic, like just growing up they were atheistic, and then they found this and they were like, man, this is now like I have a group of people that I can be atheistic with, because there's not like an atheist club of people, you know, at least to my knowledge, you know, where you can connect with other people. I mean, there probably is online or somewhere, right? But it's not like, you know, a wide thing, because people normally, if you're an atheist, you don't care that other people are atheistic, you know. That's just kind of what most of the people that I met there had come out of like Christianity, or they were already atheistic.
That makes sense. Really interesting. That doesn't really surprise me. That would be some of their background. Now, I'm really curious. You worked at this metaphysical shop. I don't know that I've ever gone to a metaphysical shop. What was that like? What did you do? What were the kind of people that came in?
Oh man, I don't know if I'm allowed to say half the stuff that I want to say. So walking in, it was very, very inviting, very clean, very like white and just very shiny, right? It was kind of like a gift shop where there was just like, you had like little figurines and stuff, right? They had like you have embroidered blankets with like I love you mom and just like kind of stuff like that, right? Think
Sure.
Like half of it was kind of like a really nice hallmark, and the rest of it was like any different kind of crystal you could imagine, different types of like jewelry with crystals in it. There were cauldrons, there were spell books, there's incense, there's candles, there's bells, there's ointments and resins and anything like powders and a lot of different herbs and like anything that you would need for like spell work you could find here. We also did have multiple psychics on staff, tarot readers on staff. Some of them were very legitimate, and then others were absolute frauds and cold readers. And I knowing now, right? I used to call myself an empath. I was like, oh, I'm an empath, you know. But now I just know that I've been given a gift of discernment, and I know what that is now, right? But we had people on staff that like were just taking people's money to give them comfort, and I was very against that. Yeah, it was interesting.
So when you describe a psychic that was cold reading, which is just a trick, versus real psychics, are you talking about those that really now as a Christian look back and think we're tapping into demonic powers and could know things that they couldn't know? Like, how do you interpret that looking back?
Yeah. So for me, right, and I can't really, I can speak to one individual who I will talk about. She has no idea that I'm actually even talking to you, and she'll be thrilled. I can speak to myself when I say that, like, I've had people, at the shop come to me and be like, "You're an empath, right? Like, other people told me, that you know about stuff that's happened to them. Like, what do you get from me? Or like, what can you tell me about me?" And I'm like, "Well, I know that, like, you've been very depressed and you've cried in your shower recently," and they just break down, right? And so during that time, I'd be like, "Look at how empath I am, right? Like, how special is this? Like, I am awesome." And now I know that, like, yeah, but that was a gift that I was, like, using without knowing that it was, like, a gift, because I can still kind of do that with people, right? Like, I can tell if someone's, like, faking a smile, like, you could be the happiest person and, like, I know that something's up. So at that point, like, I know that was, I didn't believe that it was coming from where I believe it's coming from now, right?
Okay.
There's a couple other people there that I do believe were, like, decently legitimate, but I'm not sure where they were getting, like, what their resources were. But one of my friends, we became good friends. We became fast friends. And I still call her my sister. But she was a theistic Satanist.
Oh, wow.
And she openly, she would do, like, readings and, would have different crystals out and all this stuff, and I had multiple readings from her, and every single thing that she said was accurate, like, super accurate. I remember I actually took my aunt to go talk to her because my aunt was having, like, a lot of just emotional issues. So we were like, let's go just talk to her. And we did. And a thing was said that I had no clue about. So she could have not known. There's no way that she could have known. And this whole thing was, like, true. And there was, like, a whole thing about it. But she very openly was getting all of her information from demons. And I will interrupt myself for just a moment and say that, like, a day or two ago at 9:30 at night, I got a phone call from her, and I was like, "Okay, like, what's going on, sis? Like, this is weird. Why are you calling me?" And she told me that she got baptized in Christ.
Oh my goodness.
Like, just the other day.
That is incredible. That is incredible.
So she sent me her baptism video and her testimony, and I just, like, lost it. There's no way that would have happened if it wasn't spirit. Like, if it was not the Holy Spirit moving in that girl, there's no way that she would have come out of that.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. Now, how long would you have described yourself as a Satanist? How long was that season for you?
That was probably about 2 years.
It was about 2 years. Okay. So then talk to me about now when you started to come out and you started to see holes in it. And then, so talk about that. And then we'll talk about what brought you into Christianity.
I didn't see holes in it. Like, that's the thing,
okay.
Right? Is that I was, like, very solid, steadfast, like, I am a Satanist. And the timeline kind of goes like, I'm an atheistic Satanist who just believes that when you die, your brain just stops working and your body is your body and you go back to the ground, and, like, that's it, right? It just done, right? And then we move on to, okay, well, I'm still a Satanist, but maybe I'm an agnostic-ish Satanist, and maybe there's something else out there. I don't know. I've never died. I can't tell you, right? And then went into still a Satanist, right? Practicing TST, but also doing, like, witchcraft and ritual and all that stuff, right? Because for some reason, like, that was a comfort for me. It was, like, something I was used to. And as this is happening, my mom starts having like dementia type symptoms.
Okay.
And then this is where everything just like, this is the catalyst at that point.
Okay, so she's going through that. Some people would experience that and start questioning God, hate God that he allowed this to happen to their mom, who was a Christian. How and why did it affect you differently?
So at first it was like, I just don't know what's happening to her, right? And I actually, like, she called me over to the house, like during her, like the very beginning of her like onset of her symptoms, actually called me over to the house, like, hey, can you clear it, because there's something in here with us. Because she was like hearing footsteps, and she was hearing doors close, and we would later find out that she was hallucinating, right? But she had called me over and was like, I need you to do whatever it is that you do with your spells and stuff, because she was like panicking at that point, right? So I went over and I did my thing, and and she said that it stopped happening for a while, and then it started happening again, and like now we know why. But at that point, I still didn't believe in God, but then I was like kind of yelling at him as if he were there, because I was angry. And this is kind of after she had passed away. So just briefly, right? She started having symptoms in like July, like June or July. Fast forward to like October, and she went into the hospital, and like they did countless tests on her, and we finally would find out that she had Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, or CJD. It's a brain deterioration disease. And she passed away in December. And at that point, during her like memorial, she, like I said, she was very Christian. So we were like, we're gonna have a Christian memorial, we're gonna find a pastor, we're gonna get someone out, because it's what she would have wanted, right? I was sitting there as a Satanist in my mom's funeral, right, with the man that I was seeing at the time, also a Satanist, sitting there like, what is going on? And that just broke my brain, because I was like, I don't know what's happening. I'm Satanist, this dude. And the pastor that we had asked to do her memorial was actually one of my high school friends that I was in theater with, and my mom was very active in theater, so she knew him. So I was like, this is perfect, right, for him to be doing her memorial. And I was at that point so like just distraught, and then was like, that thing that I told you about earlier where I'm like, pick up a Bible, right, was kind of coming back. But I was angry and I was hurt, because like, why, if you are a benevolent God, right, if you love us so much, why would you take my mom the way that you did? Like, that was cruel, right? So I'm like angry and hurt in my head, and I bought a Bible. I went to like a used bookstore and I bought a cheap Bible with the intention of reading it and highlighting every evil, malicious thing that God did to humanity, and everything that, every injustice towards women, and all the slavery, and just every bad thing in the Bible. And I'm reading it and I'm highlighting stuff and circling stuff, and eventually the circling stopped and the highlighting stopped, and it backfired, and I started having like actual questions about Jesus and God, and like, what does this all mean, and like, how, like, why did this happen, or how did this happen? So I reached out to my friend who was the pastor that did my mom's memorial, and I was like, hey man, I have some questions, and he was gracious enough to meet with me and answer a lot of those.
Well, thank the Lord he didn't respond the way some early Christians did and said, just have faith and don't ask questions, you're not welcome here.
I am so blessed. Like, John, thank you, John. I love you, man.
That's awesome. He loved you as a person, took your questions seriously. Now, where did evidence come into play in your journey? Because you, in your testimony, the short videos you did, You seem to highlight that. I think it was the second video as being significant. So how did that fit into where you're at in this stage in your life?
So that pastor that did my mom's memorial, right? We met up at a park, and he answered a lot of these questions, and he sat with me as I cried about stuff, and at the end of it, he was like, I'm going to recommend a book to you that I don't normally recommend to people because it kind of reads like a textbook and it's not for everybody. It's
true.
And he's like, I normally don't recommend it, but like, because you're asking these really really involved questions, I really think it'll be beneficial for you. So he like told me what it was. It was the new evidence that demands a verdict, and he like pulled it up on like Amazon or whatever, and he was like, it's this one, you should get this one, or whichever one that he was like, I don't know if he knew that there was like a new version, but he was like, you should get this one, it's like the revised one. So I was like, bet, and like took a screen cap of it. And that's important, and I'm so glad that I took a screen cap of it. I'm so glad. So boom, took a screen cap and was like, I'll look this up later. So I look it up later. I go on like Barnes and Noble and like that kind of thing, and like no one in my local area has it because it's kind of like a niche thing in a lot of circles. So I go on Amazon, and it's like like $36-40 on Amazon, and in my Satan brain I was like, I'm not going to spend $40 on a book that I will just collect dust, right? Like it's just kind of I will never read it. I'll just sit there. But 8 days later, and I just started like my new job. It was my first day on the job as like a field technician, home theater installation person with a tech company. And so I get in the truck and I go to buckle my seatbelt, and between the center console and my seat is literally that book, like the same edition that he had recommended, like down to everything. And I just like froze and looked over at the guy who was training me and was just like, not to be weird, but is this yours? You just like drive around with a copy of new evidence just chilling out in your car? And he kind of laughed a little, and he was like, no, that's not mine. Like a client left that for another person, like one of our staff, and he didn't really want it, so it's just kind of been sitting here ever since. Like you can take it if you want it. So it is now sitting comfortably on my bookshelf in the bedroom.
That's amazing.
Nuts.
I love it. Now you described reading some of that, but just even the book aside, take us to the part where you're like, I'm no longer a Satanist, because when you got this book, you said, I was a Satanist, didn't want to spend $36, whatever it was, to becoming a Christian, saying, this makes sense. I believe it.
Yeah. Well, definitely that moment that I even saw that book there, like I am not a math person by any stretch of the imagination, right? So I went to a couple of my more mathematically inclined friends, and also to some AI chatbots, and was like, what are the actual odds of finding this particular, but like any object? It could have been any object, right? So here, like my logic is like brain is trying to justify out of this somehow, right? But the actual number, when you look at, okay, how many vehicles did we have in the fleet? Okay, like 15, maybe 12, 15. So we have 12 to 15 vehicles. Could have been any person that day, but it was that person, that vehicle, that day, right? Like that, it was a book. It could have been anything. It could have been like a half-eaten sandwich, but no, it was a book. Okay. For it to be that book and that specific edition is just nuts to me. Not to mention that it was literally 8 days after I had been in like 8 has always been in like a huge number in my life, right? But it's also very significant like biblically. So is like I couldn't science my way out of that one. That was the one thing that like I couldn't justify out of it. And finally I just kind of like gave up trying, you know, and was like, all right, like that was weird, but I hear you now, right? I'm listening. So like, what else do you have? Like, I'm listening. So I started, like, I pulled out my old Bibles and I started reading. And I am very much, I am less like Gideon, but still kind of very Gideon-esque, where I'm like, you got anything else for me? Like, I know I didn't, I'm not trying to test you. I'm really not. And I thank you for everything that you've given me, but please, like, I just need something. So I was walking around the backyard one day, like maybe a month or so after that whole thing happened, and was just like asking him to like send me a clover, right? Like a 4-leaf clover. It's not that hard. People find them all the time. So this found a 6-leaf clover in the yard, and I'd never seen one of those. And the odds of finding one of those are like very, 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 very small too. So I was like, all right, this is weird. Like this is weird. So just started doing more like research and started, you know, like I, you know, read obviously some of, you know, new evidence, and it's just like a lot of my questions were like in scripture, when, you know, it says like, well, this happened on this hour and this happened on this hour, and they're two books, right, that are describing the same event, but why do they say that they're at different times? Well, because they're using different calendars, because they were different cultures, right? So it's very like, a lot of the stuff, you know, made sense after that. And you have to really, a lot of scripture, you really have to take into like the actual context of the time. You can't just like read it.
Amen.
As you know, as you know, someone who lives in 2024 in the United States, you can't just read through the entire Bible and take it at face value. Like, you have to really think about like, when was this written and by who, and what was their status, and why are they actually writing this, and what was their goal of writing this, right? For it to make sense. And so I think a lot of times when people, you know, read the Bible, like it tends to kind of like, a lot of really important stuff, the stuff that like me as a Satanist, right, would argue against, because I have like notebooks of like questions like that, right? That once you actually look at the historical context of it, it just completely like wipes away like all of those questions, and you're like, okay, well, like, no, like now this makes sense.
So you're reading the Bible to find all the just bad things in it. Your heart starts to change. You have the two coincidences that get your attention, but you dive into the evidence and it starts to make sense to you. What was the decision to get baptized, and what was that like?
It's hard to describe, because it was just like it's like gravity, you know? Like, I can feel gravity now. Like, anyone can feel gravity, right? But you only feel it when you're paying attention to it, right? Like, you don't think about it unless you're thinking about it. So for me, it was like, all right, well, you have my attention and I'm listening, and I'm reading about this, and I'm like poring over stuff. Like, I'm a big fan of like the Bible Project, and like, you know, going into that, and I, you know, listened to, you know, several different podcasts and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was just like, now that I'm listening, I can hear you, and now that I like am really paying attention to it, I can feel your presence. Like, and you're gonna have times like as a Christian, right? Like recently, if you've looked at my Instagram, you know that I'm in a bit of a valley right now. But I've been in this valley before, and the only difference is that now I still, like, I know that he's there, right? I know that God exists. Before, I was like, yeah, he probably exists, but I can't feel him, so that must mean he's not there. That's not true. That just means that you can't feel him right now, right? So I think that, you know, as Christians, like, you're gonna have valley moments. My brain fell out. I don't know where I was going with that.
That's totally okay. You were just talking about certain challenges that you have right now, and I was talking about when you chose to get baptized.
Baptized,
Yeah.
that's right. It was, yeah, like I was saying, it's kind of like I just knew, like I said, it's kind of like gravity. It just I finally felt it.
Mm.
Um, I finally felt it and was like, this is it. Like there's no other explanation for life. There's no other explanation for, just anything existing. Like I'm gonna do this so that people know, like, that you don't have to be a certain way in order to be forgiven. You don't have to be a certain way in order
Mm.
to believe in Christ. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to talk a certain way. I mean, there's definitely some guidelines, but
Sure.
you're not like, God doesn't hate you. God doesn't hate anybody. God is benevolent and loving and forgiving. God, like, because if he wasn't, like, he would have just given up on me like years ago. But he
Mm.
never did. He just kept poking and poking, and finally I started to listen, and that's why I got baptized. So I was like, I need to tell people this, and I need people to, like, to see that this is, like, you can be forgiven, like, you can have peace. And, like, that's the biggest thing. Is I've now that I know God, I used to have, like, a debilitating panic disorder, and I used to be on, like, a lot of different medications and, like, Xanax and all that stuff. And I haven't been on medication for years, because I just it's a peace and it's a comfort, and kind of like I was saying, even now, you know, I'm in a valley right now where I'm not, necessarily, like, on fire right now, like a lot of Christians, like, well, we have those ebbs and flows.
Sure.
But even in the valley, like, you can still believe, right? And that's why I got baptized. Like, I need people to know. I want to make that public, like, proclamation that, like, no, like, this is a real thing.
Hmm. I really appreciate your vulnerability, your transparency and honesty, sharing your story. You've done some short videos on this, but I didn't find anywhere where you had really gone into some more depth about this. So I know it's not always easy to revisit some of these experiences that you were talking about, but I know our listeners are just going to be encouraged and amazed and blessed at just this journey that you've been on, which is really about somebody looking to belong, but also asking questions. And the church should be a place for both. That people are not going to be judged by the way that they dress, look differently. Come on in. We care about you. We love you. And we're going to take your questions seriously. And I'm glad you've come full circle and found that. So I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your story, Tepe.
Thank you so much. Anytime that I can get on there, and anytime that, I can let people know that, like, no, this is real. Like, this is coming from, like, an ex-Satanist. Like, this is a real thing, and he loves you, and he's going to love you, and you're allowed to ask questions, and you're allowed to wear black lipstick. It's okay. This doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. He matters.
Amen. I love it. What's the best place people can follow you? Is it on Instagram?
It is on Instagram now. So right now, my personal page is at the KMTepe, the KMTEPE. But we also are starting what we're calling maybe like a micro ministry, at Eighth Day Alliance. And that's basically it's very small right now, but we do have a very small community of really awesome people who are born again believers. And a lot of us are emo, gothic, alternative. Like, we love Christian metal music. So if that's you, you found us.
I love that. That is super cool. What a neat ministry that you're reaching out to, using some of the hurt and pain that you went through in your life now to offer to people what you wish somebody could have offered to you a number of years ago. So may God bless those efforts, and in due time, let's have another conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me here.
This has been a real joy. Now, folks watching, before you click away, make sure you hit subscribe. We've got some other stories coming up. As you can tell, we are trying hard to find people with just interesting, fascinating stories of just seeking truth, God's grace in their life, that God can bring literally people out of whatever background you could imagine and transform them as you've seen today. That's part of the goal. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any others. And if you've thought about studying apologetics in depth, we have the top-rated program at Biola Talbot School of Theology. Would love to have you in the class. Information below. Check it out. It's fully online, fully distance, and it'd be a joy to have you. So check that out. Again, Tepe, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. God bless.